Peter had always seen himself as a man in control. His life with Mylene on the surface appeared flawless, an attractive couple, well regarded by their peers, living in a beautiful home and thriving in their careers. Yet beneath this polished exterior, a much darker reality unfolded, one that only Mylene truly understood. For years, Peter's control had been subtle but suffocating. Manipulation, emotional outbursts, and occasional threats that kept her in line, silencing her with fear. But what Peter didn't realize was that the cracks in his perfect facade were beginning to show. Lately, Peter had noticed Mylene acting strangely, distant, withdrawn, as if burdened by something heavy she couldn't share. It gnawed at him, but it was only when he secretly searched through her phone that everything changed. He'd done it before, but never admitted it to her. This time, though, he stumbled upon a series of texts between Mylene and her boss, Rocky. There was nothing outright scandalous, but the content ignited a fire of suspicion. Late-night meetings, urgent replies, and a cryptic message from Rocky, "Don't worry, I've got your back." That line lingered in Peter's mind, and he couldn't shake it. His heart raced as his mind spiraled into dark, jealous thoughts. He couldn't sleep that night, plagued by visions of Mylene in Rocky's office, vulnerable and perhaps taken advantage of. His anger grew, fueled by his assumptions, and by morning, Peter was certain that something had to be done. He would confront Rocky. He would demand answers. He would put an end to whatever was going on behind his back. The next day, Peter drove to Rocky's office, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His mind had already constructed the confrontation. Rocky would stammer, deny everything, and Peter would expose him. In his mind, there was no doubt. Rocky was a villain, the man who had touched what was his. Peter's long-standing prejudices stirred, transforming his anger into something far uglier. He barged past the receptionist, who tried to calm him down. Peter didn't hear her. He stormed into Rocky's office, his jaw tight with rage. As he slammed the door behind him, the accusation tumbled out before he could stop it. "You've been touching my wife, and I'm here to make sure it stops." Rocky remained unfazed. He didn't flinch. He didn't even seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair, calm and collected, his eyes studying Peter. "I think you're misunderstanding something," Rocky said coolly. "Sit down. Let's talk." Peter refused, crossing his arms and glaring at him, waiting for a denial, an apology, anything to support his accusations. But instead, Rocky spoke in a tone so composed it threw Peter off balance. "Yes, Mylene and I have talked. She's come to me for help. But you're focusing on the wrong thing. What you should be asking is why she didn't come to you." Peter scoffed, his fists clenching. "Don't turn this around on me. She's my wife. What kind of boss touches a married woman?" "The question isn't that," Rocky said, his voice steady. "The question is, why didn't Mylene feel safe talking to you?" Peter's breath caught. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't even considered it. Rocky continued, his voice lowering. "Mylene came to me because she was scared of you. She was terrified of how you'd react. The truth is, I've been helping her, but not the way you think." Peter's stomach lurched. "What do you mean?" Rocky stood and walked slowly to the window, his back to Peter as he spoke quietly. "She told me about how you treat her, about the way you've made her feel small for years. She felt trapped. That's why she stayed quiet." Peter's mind raced, trying to piece together what Rocky was saying. This couldn't be true. He had always been the strong one, the provider. He never saw himself as a threat. But Rocky's next words made him realize just how wrong he had been. "That so-called touching you're worried about wasn't about anything inappropriate," Rocky said. "It was about giving her the strength to stand up to you, to help her see what you've become." Peter's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed into a chair. His breath quickened as the pieces fell into place. Mylene hadn't been hiding an affair. She'd been preparing to leave him, to escape the grip he'd held on her for so long. She had been seeking the courage to confront him. "And here's the part you don't know," Rocky added, his voice firm. "We've been working with law enforcement. They know everything. Mylene wanted to expose you, but not out of vengeance. She wanted you to see what you've become. She wanted to give you the chance to change. Peter's world shattered. Everything he thought he knew, his accusations, his anger, his control, was a lie. He had been the one breaking his marriage. Why? Peter asked, his voice shaking. Why didn't she just tell me? Because she was afraid of you, Rocky replied. She wanted to protect herself. She wanted you to change, Peter. Not for her, but for you. Peter was numb, his emotions swirling, mixing with guilt, regret, and disbelief. He had never thought of himself as the villain, but now, in this moment, he understood. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Rocky looked him in the eye, his tone gentle yet firm. That's up to you. Mylene still cares about you. She wants you to change, to become the man she thought you were when she married you. But you have to want it. If you do, I can help you. For the first time in years, Peter felt truly powerless. Not in the way he had always feared, but in a way that made him confront the painful truth. His need for control had been a defense against his own insecurities, his own fear. He had never learned to trust, never learned that love was about freedom and growth. Over the next few weeks, Peter began therapy, with Rocky's guidance, addressing the toxic patterns of emotional abuse he had inflicted on Mylene. The anger he had once felt began to dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of remorse. Mylene, hesitant at first, agreed to stay and work through their issues. Slowly, they rebuilt the trust that had been shattered, not by infidelity, but by fear and control. A few months later, their marriage was transformed. Peter had faced his demons, and with Rocky's help, he had changed. No longer was their relationship based on manipulation, but on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, they received an invitation from Rocky to his birthday party. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Peter and Mylene eagerly accepted, wanting to thank him once more. At the party, surrounded by friends and family, Peter felt a deep sense of peace. The man he had been was no longer present. Instead, he was beginning to embrace the man he could become. As the night drew to a close, Peter turned to Rocky with gratitude in his eyes. "I'll never forget this, Rocky," Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done for us, I can't put it into words." Rocky smiled, placing a hand on Peter's shoulder. "Peter, you gave yourself that second chance. I just helped you see it." And in that moment, Peter knew Rocky was right. The journey wasn't about a perfect marriage, but about growth, forgiveness, and the courage to change. And for that, Peter would always be thankful.